Hello and welcome back, guys. We're now starting a new story, Where the Love Grows, by DoeEyedBear. You can find author's profile link in the description. Let's begin Chapter 1, First Day. It's the first day of school, Izuku Midoriya, and you're already late. I'm so sorry, Miss Usagiyama. Multiple pairs of eyes moved towards the entrance of the lecture hall, watching as a boy quickly slid through the crack of the door to enter, his green hair a tangled mess and catching on his earrings, glasses crooked on the bridge of his nose, and backpack sliding off one shoulder as he offered a small bow to his teacher in a form of apologies. The teacher, who had gone by the name Usagiyama, offered him a small smile as she closed the door behind him. The door latching echoed in the silence of the room as everyone watched the boy retreat to the back of the classroom, his feet bouncing up the stairs between each rows of seats as an embarrassed heat grew across his cheeks. The contents of his backpack rattled with each step he took, even the keychain that hung from one of the zippers flinging around viciously as if hanging on to the edge of a swaying cliff. His knuckles turned white from the grip on the straps, desperately trying not to look anywhere else but the blue carpet beneath his dirty sneakers. His teacher swallowed loudly before turning to the front of the class, taking the prying eyes off the boy as he thanked her internally. Deku, a feminine whisper broke the silence to his left, causing the boy, whose name was Deku, to pause in the aisle and turn in that direction. Wide brown eyes met his in reunion, and Deku couldn't help but break a smile, his faint dimples lining his cheeks as he awkwardly excused himself through the rows of people to claim the empty seat next to his friend. When he finally reached the seat, he plopped down, bag slipping off his shoulder while swinging it in front of him to dig through it. "Uraraka, I am so glad to see you," Deku whispered between breaths, a blush of red staining his cheeks with embarrassment as he glanced at her, hand digging in his bag to retrieve his computer and place it in front of him. "Just ran all the way across campus so I wasn't late." "And how was that?" Uraraka asked, eyebrow quirked with a smile threatening her lips. "I feel like I could throw up." "Well, considering this is the farthest building from the dorms, I can only imagine," Uraraka giggled under her breath before leaning in, eyes forward to the front of the room and pencil tapping her chin as she spoke. "But if I may ask, where the hell have you been? You were supposed to move in on Friday and you never showed up. We weren't even sure if you were coming back this year." Yeah," Deku rubbed the back of his neck, an awkward laugh escaping his mouth at the realization that today was a Sunday. He was 2 days late to his original move-in day. "I had some stuff to take care of." "But how are the others?" "I didn't get to see them this morning." "They're okay. Todoroki picked up running in the morning again like last year and Momo is, well, Momo. They're always up doing things at ungodly hours," Uraraka stated while leaning away. Deku opened his mouth, his fingers typing in the password to his computer as Professor Usagiyama spoke while unintentionally interrupting him, her voice loud and booming to reach the never-ending rows in the lecture hall. Her eyes scanned the room of all old and newcomers sitting in front of her while clapping her hands together. When she spoke, everyone sat up straight, some at the edge of their seats as they rank of first-year anxieties and future restless nights. Deku peeked up from over the rim of his glasses as Usagiyama started her welcoming speech. He listened while looking around the room at who would be his classmates for the next semester. There was a perfect mix of boys and girls, some quiet and huddled into their seat while some napped away in the corners of the room. Deku didn't blame them. It was 7:30 in the morning on a Sunday. Who even wanted classes on a Sunday? Deku couldn't help but notice some already flirtatious glances across the room, many from first years sizing up future second-year hookups and one-night stands to claim their position in the college's non-existent popularity contest. It was the norm at Capella University. Everyone's first year, especially at any college, was like a fight to the death on who claimed who, or who slept with who first. Or who was the most popular coming in. Or most pretty, hot, and so forth. Deku didn't understand it, really, but he was too nervous and on edge to go out to any parties or social events his first year to make any connections. He avoided any second, third, and fourth years like the plague. He kept to himself, went to classes, and stayed within his close-knit group of friends like his life depended on it. But now, Deku's in his second year. Which meant that he was to avoid any first, third, and fourth years like his life still depended on it. Because it did. First years were too annoying, caught up in the awkward stages of social life on campus, and constantly threw themselves in the line of fire to SCK up to their seniors. Second years were the most to themselves and normal. Third years, however, were too focused on catching up with the party life, drags, SEC, but yet, not their own grades. Fourth years were nothing but bullies who you'd find being lazy in the campus library, or any moving thing within 5 feet of them just to brag about it, that way they could distract themselves from the fact that the best years of their life were coming to an end as soon as they left college. Out of all of them, Deku was thankful that this class was full of first and second years only. All he needed to do was mind his own business, right? Wrong. Hello, everyone. My name is Rumi Usajiyama, or if you would like to call me by my stage presence, Mirko, that's completely fine, Mirko stated, a large smile on her face as she slowly paced the front of the room, all eyes on her. I'd like to welcome every single one of you, no matter if you're old or new, to musical theater. Here, I like to introduce fun like no other place on campus, but most importantly, our class is based on the history, the making, and the development of stories that we are able to present to people in a unique way. My expectations in this class is to be respectful of each other and all ideas, no matter how big or small they are. We will be learning how to read scripts, how to act on stage, and some behind the stage designing like sets, costumes, and even makeup. Which means that this class will be seeing students from other classes that are affiliated with theater, especially when it comes to performing and practicing any shows in the future. And on that topic, who here would like to hear about our upcoming productions? 10 in the morning couldn't come any faster. Deku sat at his desk, tired but unwavering, as students around him rustled around with throwing their things into their backpacks and piling into the aisle of the classroom. As soon as the students mixed together, the room exploded with the sounds of many conversations, including Uraraka who leaned forward to grab her bag from underneath her chair. Deku followed suit, his eyes scratchy from too little sleep. So, Uraraka stood up as she slung her bag over her shoulder. Breakfast. There's that coffee house on campus. I'm not sure, I'm super tired, as if on cue, Deku yawned as he stood up with her, hand over his mouth while stretching. I've been driving all night. I haven't even had time to unpack yet. So you hate me? Deku turned to her, his face flat and eyes half-lidded as if to silently say, really. He didn't even have to speak for his friend to laugh loudly, and Deku couldn't help but let a small smile slip from his lips. Fine, fine, Uraraka said. You don't have any classes after this, do you? I do. F that. I know, I don't know why I even agreed to do any Sunday classes. Waking up at 7 in the morning for a 2.5-hour class should have been enough, Deku sighed as he piled onto the stairs with the other students, his shoulder bumping a first-year girl as he turned to make sure Uraraka was still behind him. Right. Anyways, since you hate me, I'm sure I'll see you around at the dorm later with the others. Uraraka asked, her hand finding the fabric of Deku's shirt to keep him close. Of course, tell the Izuku. Deku stopped in his tracks, causing Uraraka to let out a small huff as her chest collided with his back. Green eyes searched in the direction of the voice before landing on his professor, her hand in the air as she beckoned him over to the teacher's desk with a finger. We need to have a quick talk before you leave, Mirko exclaimed as she opened one of the top drawers to her desk. At this point, Deku already had the attention of multiple classmates as they passed him, the smell of faint cologne, coffee, and body odor drifting past him as Uraraka bumped his shoulder with a small, quiet whisper under her breath telling him good luck. Deku smiled back at her in an attempt to act normal before pushing across the line of students filing out of the room. If this is about being late this morning, I'm so sorry. Deku said as soon as he stood in front of the teacher's desk, his waist bent in a 90-degree bow. I'll make it up to you. I'll do extra homework, I'll clean your room, polish your shoes. Whatever you need. I will personally hand-deliver you coffee every morning for the rest of my Izuku, you're rambling, Mirko interrupted him. Deku straightened his posture, his hands to his sides, and shook his head. He kept his lips shut as he watched Mirko's lips part in another smile, this time more soft and gentle than her usual bright and big one that was only reserved for the front of the class. Izuku, I noticed that you outshined the others in last year's class in many different aspects. When it comes to your work, I am always blown away by the talent you have. Which is why I want to ask you. Mirko removed a stack of papers from her top drawer as the last of the students filed out of the lecture hall. Deku leaned forward to take a peek at the papers that were held together by a paper clip. There were small black words on the front paper that Deku couldn't read, but it was easy to tell that what she was holding was a script. Mirko set the paper down on her desk, one finger pushing the stack slowly towards him with uncertainty. With your abilities and talent, I believe you'd fit this role perfectly. I even put in a good word for you to the directors. All you gotta do is audition and it's yours. It'll look good on your resume, too. Deku looked down at the black cursive font before looking back up at his professor, who, in turn, grabbed the stack and pushed it into his chest. Follow your heart, Izuku Midoriya. Deku stood smack dab in the middle of his dorm room with a heavy sigh. A small cardboard box was resting against his stomach as he bit his lip, eyes scanning the sweet-styled room before looking at the contents in his hands once more. Inside the box was multiple notebooks and binders that Deku was sure he'd never use, as well as some sports magazines that his mother had bought and secretly snuck beneath the stationery materials. Deku stared at them, his mother's imaginary eyes staring back at him in the glossy cover of the magazines, gaze hopeful of her son finding something in them that caught his interests. He shifted his weight, one arm supporting the bottom of the box as the other reached in to grab one of the magazines on top that he had dug out earlier. On the cover was a man in football gear, his arm wheeled back mid-throw with a football glued to his palm. Deku looked it over before he sighed again, letting it fall back into the box as he rolled his eyes at the mere thought of his mother. She was so excited when Deku came to her one day with a dream in one hand and a foot out the door, until he then spoke about going to Capella University for singing and acting. Why would you go to a sports college for something that's not sports-related? To say she was disappointed was an understatement, that was for sure. Her agenda was to have a strong, manly son who was into sports, cars, girls, even. Not that she knew of his sexuality. But as soon as Deku's dream veered off into one thing that she didn't like, his mother pushed him even more into the opposite. The amount of fighting and arguments between the two of them in the last year and a half was enough to fill a lifetime. Deku scoffed to himself before someone beside him cleared their throat. He jumped, head whipping to the side before meeting three other pairs of eyes all staring up at him, his dorm mates. They all sat in an incomplete circle, colored papers and pencils scattered among themselves as they returned back to their crafts. Except all but one. You good, a deep voice one that Deku had missed dearly broke the sounds of Uraraka digging through her pencil case, a small curse coming from her mouth in a whisper. Yeah, I just can't believe I'm back here. I also can't stop thinking about my mom. Had a nasty fight before I left, Deku gulped as he stared at a pair of mismatched eyes, the pair staring back at him gently before taking another glance at the room around them. You know. I do, the man urged him to come closer by patting the only empty space in the circle of the three, to which Deku obeyed, setting his stuff on the bottom bunk nearest to him before claiming his spot. Sit down. We should all catch up. Oh. Uraraka, who sat opposite of Deku, perked up. We should. So much has probably happened with everyone over the summer, right? Momo, I know you were talking to some guy over the summer. Did anything happen with him? Deku's gaze followed Uraraka's stare at the girl to his right. She paid no attention to them, at least she acted like she hadn't as she continued to splatter glue on the back of a red sheet of paper. Her hair was let down and touched the floor as she sat cross-legged, her head down but eyelashes fluttering as she spoke softly, her voice as pretty as who it came from. You mean a ways. The man with the mismatched eyes spoke up before anyone else could. You got with Yosetsu a ways. No, Shoto. I did not get with him. I talked to him at the end of the last semester but he ghosted me a week before this one, she sighed while picking her head up to look at the man across from her. Plus, I saw him already trying to bag a third year. Uraraka scoffed loudly. Good luck with that. He's asking for a heartbreak with any third year he gets with. Tries to get with, Momo quickly corrected her. Everyone knows that getting with any second years means you're desperate, and considering that he's a second year, he's going to have a hard time with finding someone to keep him company. Uraraka hummed in response as she picked up the scissors from the middle of the circle, her hand brushing against Shoto's knee who paid no attention to her. He was looking down into his lap, eyebrows furrowed as he fumbled around with cutting out 4 small cameras sketched onto a black sheet of paper. Deku smiled, a small laugh falling through his lips as he turned towards Uraraka. Uraraka, how are things going with you and Azui? Deku narrowed his eyes at his friend. Good. Sorta. We're still going strong, is all I can say. She whipped her head up to look Deku straight in the eyes, a small mischievous smirk etching its way onto her face. What about you? You still pinning after a certain guy in third year? Deku shoved his face into the crook of his elbow in a fake cough, his cheeks hidden from their sight so they couldn't see the slight blush racing across his face like wildfire. However, Shoto was quick to look, Momo following suit as they stared at him in silence. Deku tugged his shirt away from his chest and fanned it against him, his gaze everywhere but his friend's. Man, is it getting hot in here or is it just me? Deku cleared his throat. Almost as if on cue, all 3 of his roommates spoke his name in unison. He threw his hands up in the air in defeat as he shrugged his shoulders. Their stare dug deep into him, almost like a prison keeping him in place on the ground. What? He's hot, okay. Deku crossed his arms. I mean, what can I say? Shoto leaned forward to rest his elbows on his knees, his voice high in playful banter. Really? Another year of waiting for the football captain to like you back. You do know that he probably doesn't know that you even exist, right? Deku looked away. So. Don't stoop that low, Shoto warned. It's not low. Bakugo Katsuki is the hottest on campus. He's also strong, has a good sense of fashion. Deku let his head fall towards the ceiling as he leaned backwards on his palms. He's so, I don't know. Dreamy. Deku has a point, Uraraka butted in but gritted her teeth together. But, I heard he's a D-head. Has an ego that needs to be deflated. Deku lifted his palms out towards them as if defending himself. Come on now, no Bakugo Katsuki slander in dorm. Momo threw her 2 cents in while rolling her eyes. If I was the quarterback of the most popular sports college, I would probably have an ego too. But this isn't the point. What is the point, is that Izuku here has not spoken a word to said man, nor has the guy looked in his direction. Deku scoffed while rolling his head to the side to avoid their stares between one another. What did they want him to say? That he'd immediately retract this year-long crush on the hottest man on campus. Just because he'd never made eye contact, spoken, or been feet within the man doesn't mean that a future wasn't in the long haul, right? Okay, so let's say you have a crush on this guy, right? Popular, charismatic, CC, even, Momo pointed out, earning a side-eye from Deku as she spoke while exchanging markers for new ones. How are you going to get this guy to know of your existence? From what I remember last year, you two were on completely different sides of campus. You shared no classes, clubs, anything. Plus, do we even know if he's gay? If he likes men? I don't know, Deku stated as he turned to Shoto, an eyebrow raised. Does he? Shoto looked between Deku and Momo, his finger pointing into his own chest as his eyes widened, almost like a deer caught in headlights. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. I mean, I'm just asking you because you actually know the guy, Deku pointed out. Just because I play sports with him doesn't mean I'm buddy-buddy with him, Shoto defended himself. I have no clue if he's gay or what he does outside of football. Deku squinted his eyes at Shoto, gaze following him up and down to detect any notion of lying, but instead, he huffed and turned towards the untouched crafts in front of him. Shoto was off the hook this time. Do you know if you have classes with him this semester? Uraraka broke the awkward silence with her beaming tone, her eyes scanning the finished door sign in front of her, her name splashed across it in a large, golden, sparkly mess. Few of my other second-year friends got paired with third and fourth years in some of their classes this semester. I actually don't know if I do, Deku tilted his head in thought. Momo turned towards the brunette, her hand fixing the falling pajama strap sliding from her shoulder. I actually heard all film production classes were more diverse this year, but maybe because, like, 5 of the professors doing film retired last year and they couldn't find any good replacements in time that knew all the coursework. Oh, maybe. So realistically, Deku here could finally achieve his dream of at least having a class with the universities at Boy, Momo laughed, causing Deku to roll his eyes in response. Yeah, well, enough about me and more about you guys, Deku pointed at the other 3 sitting silently in the room, eyes narrowing at one another. What classes do you guys have this semester? Shoto shrugged his shoulders. Nothing with any of you considering our majors are different. Are you still going for sports management? Momo's voice softened as she spoke to him, almost like he was a baby. Yes. I see. What about you, Momo? Uraraka asked with a curious glance, one that had her nose crinkled as she leaned in. Same as Deku. Film, Momo smiled at her. You. Uraraka beamed brightly, her faint smile lines prominent as she spoke. Costume design and theater. Deku chuckled under his breath while cutting out a large red star from a sheet of paper. His cutting job was sloppy and unprofessional, almost like his love life. He sat forward, arm coming towards his face to push his glasses up since his hands were occupied. However, he watched from the corner of his eye as Shoto barely dodged the scissors accidentally coming for his face. Both girls ignored the boys as Deku turned to the other, bowing slightly as a small apology escaped his lips. I guess I should ask you then, Deku, Momo's sweet voice filled the silence in the room. What are your classes? Deku tilted his head and squinted his eyes as he hummed to himself. It felt like an eternity of everyone's eyes on him until he straightened his posture and spoke aloud. I have production design, vocal technique, and musical theater. I'm thinking of adding another class, but Mirko, Miss Usagiyama, wants me to audition for an upcoming play. Deku let out a long sigh, his lips parted slightly. Do it, both girls yelled, causing Deku to flinch in surprise. Actually, I've been thinking of doing something else. Deku paused to take a quick glance at Todoroki who was currently finishing up the last touches of his name tag for their dorm room. I think I want to register for a sport this year. Maybe something simple, like track, or, I don't know, something small will work for me. Momo clasped her hands together before sitting up on her knees. A large smile adorned her face and Deku made a mental note to get her to smile more. It was pretty. Do cheer. Uraraka and I signed up again. We're just waiting for the roster to be announced. Momo clapped in excitement. I also know it's pretty late in the season, but I can put in a good word to the coaches. Deku laughed as he scratched at the back of his neck. I appreciate that and I would accept your offer, but I'm not flexible enough for that. I also can't dance. Oh shush, Momo slapped his knee softly. You'd be fine. At least it's not like football where you get trained to give people concussions. We don't do that, Shoto interrupted, his voice monotone as ever. Right. Sure, Momo glared at him through her thick lashes. If Izuku really wanted to do a sport, I'm sure he'd be perfectly fine in any he chooses. Shoto motioned to his male friend sitting beside him. Like football? Uraraka whispered. Exactly like football. Deku never really understood as to why he always did this to himself. For example, waking up at ungodly times to do something that wasn't the most important topic on hand. But here he was with Todoroki so early on a Monday morning that the sky was nothing but pitch black inside the gym of the recreational center. He had counted 4 hours before his first class began, so why was he up so early? Stretching. Yup. Even though Deku had been around for a year beforehand, he'd never actually stepped foot inside the place. It wasn't too bad, even though it constantly smelled of floor wax and sweat mixed together, he couldn't complain. With the occasional door chime echoing, the passerby morning yoga partakers ogling both Deku and Todoroki from the windows, and the few athletes practicing in the gym with enough space between everyone, Deku actually enjoyed the peace. Despite being tired as all hell, of course, but it was peaceful. The gym was the size of 4 basketball courts together, giving the boys enough space to claim a spot in the corner away from the athletes constantly courting ball. There was a large white net that hung from the second-floor railing and draped along the floor like a curtain near the farthest edge of the gym, giving any peaceful gym-goer a space to stretch and rest away privately from the chaos of the courts and any unwanted gazes. Screwed in along the walls behind the net were silver pull-up bars, motivational posters, and small folded orange mats that lined the floors to provide any comfort for those that wanted it. There were shelves with any type of ball you could find, footballs, volleyball, and even tennis ball. Deku even counted a hockey puck that was placed there, which, when Deku looked around, he found no reason as to why it should have been there in the first place, but he moved on. Deku claimed the corner of the gym that the white net didn't cover, giving him the option to look out into the rest of the courts and watch the athletes in their full glory. Todoroki stood next to him, hand brushing his red and white hair from his face as they people watched silently. For a Monday morning, Deku couldn't help but stand with raised brows, his head tilted at the number of people occupying the space in front of him. There was a mix of men, most of their shirts off to the side and chests sweaty, and women who minded their business on the sides, headphones plugged in and hanging in duos. When's the last time you've actually sat down to stretch? Deku looked at his friend who stood next to him, one arm drawn behind his back to capture his foot and the other swinging to keep his balance. Deku lifted his shoulders in a shrug, his head swinging back to the rest of the court to watch as 2 men raced around with a basketball. To be honest. Probably when I was in high school, Deku stated. The space between them fell back into a silence. The sounds of sneakers squeaking against the floor, balls smacking the gym tile, and the occasionally friendly banter was the only thing that kept Deku from going insane from the chiming of the gym door. In an effort to distract himself, Deku grabbed his arm, his face crunched in a wince as he slung it across his chest and held it there in a much-needed stretch. Once he felt the burn, he dropped his arm and repeated it with the other before Shoto spoke up. It's not very busy this morning. This is not very busy for you. Deku raised his brow at his friend. For a school with over 37,000 people, it's pretty dead. Even for a Monday morning. At 7 in the morning. Yes, Shoto said, glancing in his direction and then to the overhead speakers. Deku followed his gaze, eyes wide and searching the top of the metal ceiling as a sound faded in from the gym speakers that were nailed in overhead. He narrowed his stare into a squint as if it would help him hear better, which it hadn't, but as seconds passed, the sound became louder before he realized that music was playing across the entirety of the gym. Deku let a wide grin play on his lips, one that was dressed in amusement at the song choice of the morning. YMCA. They play this every morning, Shoto said, his voice drowning out into a groan. It gets to a point. Of course they do. It's a classic, Deku defended it with a chuckle. This is a classic to you. Is it not for you? Deku questioned. Deku turned towards Shoto, their eyes locked for what felt like minutes until his friend smiled, his cheeks prominent and shining in the fluorescent light of the gym. Deku watched his hair fall into his face, making his face framed perfectly from the angle Deku stood. He turned away from Todoroki's stare, arms still slung across his chest in an awkward stretch. Can I tell you something? Shoto's voice was soft and gentle, eyes studying Deku's profile in small side glances. Sure. Deku smiled, dimples popping from his cheeks. I met up with Toshinori this morning. Before I woke you up to come here, he stated. Deku whipped his head towards his duo, his green eyes wide and earrings swaying frantically as if to hang on for dear life. He let his arms fall to his sides, mouth somewhat agape while leaning in as if to beg the man to continue on with his statement. Deku wasn't sure if his friend knew how to read minds, but it seemed like he did from how fast he spoke again, keeping the green-eyed boy on his tiptoes. I told him to reach out to you. That you were looking into doing a sport and that I thought you'd be perfect. Shoto paused as he connected his gaze to Deku's. I know football isn't a small sport either. But Toshinori has been searching for the perfect person to place in as a backup for an important position. So you wouldn't actually play necessarily. If someone got injured or needed a break, you'd be put in, but you would mostly just be on the sidelines the whole season. But if you want in, you want in. You can't leave as soon as you're in there. Deku blinked. And then blinked again. You don't have to take the position. Shoto hurried frantically as if he said something wrong. I just wanted to tell you in case Shoto, you didn't have to do that, you know. I do appreciate it. And I will definitely look forward to reaching out to Mr. Toshinori. Deku gleamed, his smile never faltering. But I'm not going to lie, I'm pretty nervous about it. How come? Shoto tilted his head at him. It'll be out of my comfort zone. Plus, look at me, Deku pointed at himself, his finger digging into his chest. I don't look like someone who would play football. For a popular university. On a popular team. That my crush is the captain of. The words flooded from his mouth in a long ramble that Shoto couldn't help but laugh at. He bent down, fingertips gripping the tips of his shoes as Deku's eyes widened. Izuku's fingers found their place on the sides of his own face. A small gasp flirted from between his lips in a hushed effort to keep himself quiet. Oh my God, is this actually happening? Deku questioned himself, hands falling from his face to stare at them in excitement. It is, Shoto nodded. What position would it be? Deku stepped forward, fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. Running back. His cheeks flushed with heat and Deku couldn't help but slap his hands against them to hide the incoming blush. Even though this was something that never would happen and Shoto was just getting his hopes up, he couldn't help but to pause at the thought of his mother. Was she finally going to get the manly son that she wanted? One that was into sports. One she could brag about to others when they asked her about him. One that could finally make her proud. I also have an open space at work, too. If interested in making some extra cash on the side, Shoto said, his voice hinting at Deku to accept whatever was being laid out on the table in front of him. Deku stood facing Todoroki, his lips parted as he lifted his foot up, one arm reaching backwards to hold it in place to stretch his quadriceps in the front of his thigh. Todoroki placed a hand on his hip as the other swung above him like a sideways swimming stance, his body leaning into his hand as a small groan escaped his lips. Is everyone still there from last year? Deku asked while trying his best to push his excitement down at the previous news. Shoto shook his head no. Deku frowned. Oh. A silence fell between them again. This time, it was short-lived. Hey, Izuku. Deku hummed, eyes scanning Todoroki's face as he stared over his shoulder, causing green eyes to follow his friend's gaze towards the doors of the gym. Even though there were multiple openings to enter and exit through, the main double doors were blasted open, the hinges squeaking and bouncing off the matted walls. Most people stopped to look, those who didn't were unaware from the music blasting through their headphones loud enough to deafen them. Deku paused in his tracks, mouth falling open just slightly as Shoto stepped toward him. His hand fell to Deku's shoulder and urged him to look towards him, but his words fell to deaf ears as green eyes watched intently on the door. A sharp breath fell through Izuku's lips as a man stepped through the doorway. His hair was a soft blonde and spiked in many different directions, eyes beet red as the blush that creeped on Deku's cheeks from seeing the man, somewhat up close. Even though they were practically on either ends of the courts, Deku told himself that if he squinted hard enough through the people passing in the gym, that he'd be able to see the way the man's eyes lit up when he looked up from his phone. Izuku let his hand cover his mouth. Bakugo Katsuki was hot. Even hotter up close. He couldn't help but let his eyes wander. along the frame of his crush while internally fangirling. He wasn't sure if he'd ever have the opportunity to get this close again. Shoto pulled at his shoulder again, but Deku stayed stone put in his stance, mouth watering at the way Bakugo's abs rippled under his skin-tight shirt. It was a deep black, but the muscles underneath looked as if they were carved from stone. His biceps popped from the sleeves, and as he walked along the first court to the second, Deku noticed his hands stuffed into the pockets of his gray sweatpants that hung loose on his hips. As Bakugo walked, his hair slightly bounced with him. His eyes were narrow and intimidating, almost like a siren's that were framed with long lashes. When his hand removed itself from his pocket to drag his fingers along his neck and over his Adam's apple, Deku noticed how big and veiny his hands were. Even from afar, Deku sniffed out every detail of the man until red eyes swept the gym. Deku paused. Bakugo was now almost to the third court, his long legs carrying a large stride as he neared closer to the fourth court. Where Deku was. The fourth court was mostly empty besides for a few solo athletes that kept to their own little circle. If Bakugo wanted to do some practicing where he wouldn't be interrupted, sharing the last court was the best bet. And as he neared, eyes still not connecting with green ones wide in awe at the end of the court that watched him intensely, he let his intimidating gaze scan the gym and everyone in it, starting from the first court, to the second, to the third, and as soon as red almost met green as Bakugo stepped foot on the fourth court, Deku ducked behind the white privacy net, taking Todoroki with him by accident. Knowing Deku's luck, as soon as he dived for the net, his shoe caught on his other heel, causing him to fall forward and stumble into Todoroki, who fell with him. Deku closed his eyes while waiting for his body to smack against the tile of the gym flooring, but inside he felt two hands snake around his waist tightly and a small groan beneath him as they collided with the floor. Deku's eyes shot open, meeting mismatched ones underneath him as Todoroki held Izuku in place. He froze instantly, noses inches away as their breath mingled together in a silent dance between them. Their chests were pressed together, only the thin fabric of their shirts keeping each other from feeling the racing hearts of the other. Before long, Deku looked down, a blush creeping along his cheeks when he realized he was straddling the one beneath him. "Oh my God," Deku said between nervous swallows as he scrambled up from on top of his friend, his upper half doing rapid sets of small bows. He let a hand out for Todoroki to take, mind taking notice of the reddening of the man's face. "Are you okay?" "I'm so sorry, Shoto laughed as he accepted Deku's help, interrupting him. "You're okay, Izuku." "Really?" Deku glanced towards the gym that was now hidden behind the white curtain. He could see the entirety of the courts as people ran and played about. From on the courts, there was no way to see through the curtain, giving the two boys a shroud of privacy as Shoto dusted himself off from the dirt of the wooden tile beneath him. Deku's gaze drifted to Bakugo as he took his place on the last court, his attention on stuffing both his earbuds into his ears. Good, he didn't need his first impression to be clumsy. Or see him inches away from accidentally kissing another man. Not that Deku would have kissed his friend if he had the opportunity to. "Right. Buy me a drink first, at least," Shoto joked, taking Deku from his thoughts. Deku laughed nervously, his fingers fiddling with the bottom of his shirt as he turned his attention to the boy in front of him. They were still behind the net. Just the two of them. Deku let his arms fall to the side while swallowing hard. He looked anywhere but Todoroki and let his gaze settle on the man just feet away on the other side of the net. Shoto followed his gaze. "Oh, right," Shoto said, his tone defeated. Deku frowned. "I should probably get back, I have to get ready for class." "Isn't production design your first class?" Shoto asked as he dug around his pockets for his phone. "That's not until 11, is it not?" "I have to take a shower, eat breakfast," Deku claimed. "Do stuff. What about stretches?" Shoto let his hands fall to his sides defeatedly. "Maybe tomorrow." "I have no classes." "Well, I do." Deku sent a side glance towards the courts again, making Shoto turn around to glare directly at Bakugo through the net, who, in his defense, had no idea what was going on. Nor would he. At least, That's what Deku thought as he watched his friend run his hand through his hair and turn back around to face the green-haired boy. It's because he's here, isn't it? Shoto pointed at the blonde through the net. Deku huddled into himself. Possibly. They made awkward eye contact before Deku flung his arms around like a toddler, his voice high and whiny. Okay, maybe. I'm just nervous, okay? Deku defended himself. We were about to make some eye contact there. I don't think I can focus when my crush is literally 20 feet away from me. Deku, Shoto turned towards Bakugo again for a split second. When he turned back, his words fell from his mouth as he watched his friend back away, hands in the air as Deku pressed his lips together in a firm line. He was slowly making his way to a wooden door on the side of the gym behind the net, one that would take him directly outside. It was his getaway. He'd say his goodbyes, exit out the door, and never show his face around or visit the recreational center after this. Even if he knew Bakugo came there, seeing him up so close set Deku into such a panic. God, he was such a loser. Shoto put his hands on his hips. Really, Izuku? Yup, Deku gave him a thin-lipped smile. Now if I may. Before Shoto could get a word out, Deku leaned back on the door, causing it to swing open as Deku stumbled backwards. Shoto stepped forward to grab onto him, but he steadied himself with the doorframe, his earrings dangling and getting caught in his hair. See you around. Shoto sighed, his hand coming into a fist as if to stop him and to say something else, but he took a deep breath before dropping his hand. Sure, I guess. Cool. And with that, Deku spun around, letting the gym door shut behind him before he took off across the courtyard. Chapter 2, stuck the faraway echo of a ringing bell from a nearby historical tower, the howling of the wind through the shaking trees, and the occasional gentle laughter of students in the distance is what the incoming fall mornings were like on the campus of Capella University. It was a quiet Monday, as well as the second day of classes, and even though it was still early somewhat in the morning, the walkways were void of many people either already in class, sleeping, or hanging around other parts of campus like the cafes or gyms, their days full of studying or practice for the upcoming sports season. Any passers-bys that Deku caught wind of across the quad were slouched forward, head down and feet dragging along the white concrete at the sudden start of the new semester. He scoffed to himself. He knew how they felt, especially with the faint hint of eye bags under his own eyes and the occasional yawn here and there, his feet lazily carrying his body along the wet quad and towards a tall brick building in the distance. Deku found himself walking to class alone this morning in a hurry, his fingers curled tightly around the chest strap of his bag as he marched down the pathway, the morning air dewy from last night's rain. He loved the feeling on his skin, the way the sun shone against his face as the lingering kisses of the moisturize in the air seeped away into the cracks of the ground beneath his feet. He loved when it rained, especially in the later hours where he could sit and watch, his attention on the running students as they took off across the yard to beat the storm. He'd laugh at them, knowing he's been there before, clothes soaking wet as he'd walk into his classes. He smiled at the memories. As he walked, Deku thought back to how Momo had offered to come with him since they shared the same morning class on Mondays, but he turned her down, claiming that he really needed some fresh morning air alone to get the day started. In the silence of her presence, he could hear the music of the birds chirping all around him, maybe even a squirrel hidden in the bushes in between the sidewalk and the tree line of the quad, its small body emerging and taking off towards the other end of campus. The rapid beating of a distant marching band drumline echoed in the empty sky, making Deku look up, his eyes squinting against the harsh reality of the sun beating down, creating shadows of the trees on either side of him to stretch across the sidewalk like slender, creepy fingers reaching to hold each other tightly. Deku let his chest rise and fall with a heavy sigh, eyes closing against the cold morning breeze as he continued walking, his destination pinned at the entrance of one of the halls that housed his first morning class that he stumbled out of bed for. To stop himself from being late, and to get a decent seat in class since they weren't being assigned, Deku decided to leave the dorms 30 minutes earlier than he wanted to, hence the reason he told a confused Momo in a daze of sleep to go back to bed, her hair a messy bun and eyes open to a tired sliver. She was still in her silk pajamas and climbing halfway down her bunk bed when he urged her to stop scrambling around, maybe even grab a cup of coffee in one of the cafes here on campus before heading to class. She agreed with the thought of a morning cup of tea and not coffee, but only on the premise that he'd save her a seat, too. Which, of course, he promised he would. The hall was a few blocks away on campus, and if it was still the same as last year, his production design class with Mr. Takami was on the top floor of the building. Meaning that Deku would have to SCK it up, get past the whining, and choose the shortcut, which meant taking the old outdated elevators for once. They always smelled like cigarettes and body odor, and at every floor it would lurch like a fish out of water. He hated them with a passion, but he'd rather that than run up 3 flights of endless stairs that would tire him out way too quick. Sure, the stairs would have worked perfectly for him, especially on a morning like this with the random spurts of students bustling around the entirety of the campus and not huddled into one place like usual. But no matter the time, whether it was day or night or in between, the stairs were always crammed with 3rd and 4th years taking part in any gossip before any classes could start. Maybe an occasional mix of first years trying to hop in the popularity bandwagon by mingling with their superiors, too. Deku clicked his tongue and shook his head at the thought of it. He probably looked crazy thinking to himself as he walked up the concrete stairs to the building, head down and stare focused on his steps as other students shouldered past him with their friends, voices loud and full of excitement while talking about classes, practice, and campus parties. With the upcoming fall season, everyone was excited. It was all everyone could talk about in the beginning of the year. It meant camping with friends, amazing football games, incredible school spirits from the students around campus, and parties that were thrown by the fraternities and sororities that always happened to attract every rival within a 50-mile radius. So he didn't blame them for being so happy in the morning about the air feeling like autumn falling upon them. Deku was happy about it, too. He loved summer, but he loved everything else a little more. Deku flung the door open to the hall before stuffing his hands into the pockets of his loose black denim pants. The fuzzy, dark sage green sweater he wore complemented his hair, the band of black headphones sitting atop of his head and creating a dent into the green mess. His black framed glasses sat at the bridge of his nose, the tip of it a faded red from the breeze of the incoming colder weather. His silver earrings peeked from the bottom of his curls almost like a hanging chain, one end attached to the top of his ear and the other in the soft flesh of his lobule. Faded dimples shone into the skin of his cheeks as he pulled his phone from his pocket, lips pressed into a thin line as he scrolled through the songs in his unlabeled playlist. He clicked a song of his choice with the tap of his thumb before lifting his head, his stare taking in the view in front of him. It was as familiar as the back of his hand. This side of the hall had housed many mornings and nights from his first year, and seen the worst and the best of him, too. It had smelled of fresh leather and air freshener, with the occasional mix of coffee as many students walked past him, cups in hand and phone in the other. The first thing that Deku came face to face with first was a long corridor. The ceilings were double that of a normal room and long strips of warm light hung from metal rods, giving the entrance a soft, welcoming glow. Closed and open doors lined both sides of the walls, each surrounded with panels of multiple colored types of wood and signs that hung above them, giving students insight of what each room was for. The floor was a shiny, glossy, marbled black with stains of orange mixed in that reflected off the hanging lights, and as people around him continued on with their day, their shoes squeaked loud enough against the tile and over the music playing in his headphones. He continued walking along the open hallway until it opened up into a large study hall to his right, the place lined with tables, couches, chairs, and even bean bags. Past that, the once single hallway split into 4 directions. To his left led to a small walkway to the restrooms, and to his right was service desks for any students, no matter the subject. He continued forward and past the split way, then past the row of small cafes and tables that lined the wall to his left and away from the bathrooms. At the end of the corridor was a set of 2 stairs that overlooked a study area. One staircase led down to the student-centric seating, but the other went up to all the lecture halls. Before Deku could reach the stairs, he quickly took a sharp right through a small hidden hallway with a hanging sign that pointed towards it, the bright orange letters labeled elevator, catching his gaze. The walls were painted in a deep orange and the hand-painted portrait of a cartoon-style red panda caught Deku's attention, even though he had seen it there a million times already. There was a green circle backdrop behind the face and chest of the animal, its arms extended as if welcoming anyone who looked in its general direction. It wore a black and orange graduation gown and on top of its head rests a plain black cap. Below it, cutting off the chest, was a red banner that extended the length of the photo itself, the words, Capel Uni, in large white bold letters. The facial expression that the animal wore was one of a challenge, its white brows furrowed into one another and its mouth hung open, showing a row of sharp shadowed bottom teeth. Its eyes were a light blue and the pupils were pure white instead of black, giving it an intimidating look of both pride and ambitiousness. Which made sense, considering that Capel University prided itself in their sports department, and their mascot being a red panda meant the expression would always be fierce and fiery. Not one to back down from a challenge. Across from the drawing was a row of 3 silver elevator doors with a set of arrow buttons between each one. Deku stopped in his tracks in front of one, his body leaning forward as his fingers pressed a metallic button with a faded-out white arrow pointing up on it. When the light around it lit up a light blue, Deku stepped back, completely missing the squeaking of shoes stopping just feet behind him. He ignored them, oblivious of anyone else around him from the blasting of the music ringing in his ears. Deku pulled out his phone again as he adjusted the strap of his bag from across his chest. He looked down at the device, his fingers typing away at a message to Momo as the elevator let out a loud ding, an automated female's voice fading in from the inside as the doors slid open, revealing multiple students crammed into just a few feet of space. Deku looked up, eyes wide as they all filed out quickly in an organized row. He watched them walk out, each pair of eyes looking at Deku, and then past him and over his shoulder before whispering to their friends. He chalked it up to them taking notice of the portrait behind him, turned away from them, and let his feet move forward as the last student exited. As soon as Deku stepped foot into the elevator and hit the button for the top floor, someone quietly followed suit behind him, their shoes squeaking against the tile in the hallway before meeting with the black mat on the elevator floor. There was a blur of black from the side of Deku's vision and he debated on looking over to see who it was, but he ignored the longing and continued on with staring at his phone. He hummed to himself, lips pouted downwards as his thumb hovered over his screen, mind racing in an attempt to evade the silent awkwardness while the doors slowly slid shut, cutting both of them off from the rest of the world. It took a few seconds between the two before the smell of the other person hit Deku. It was cologne. An expensive one at that. It smelt of a blend of oak and vanilla, with the smallest hint of caramel and leather. Even when the person moved to rest against the hand railing to his left, their body completely now facing Deku, the smell stayed strong. But he wasn't complaining. However, the burning hole in the side of his face made him swallow harshly. The hair on his arms stood straight up, making them prickle against the fabric of his sweater. All he could muster up the courage to do was turn his phone off, his hand stuffing it in his back pocket before looking up at the corner of the elevator. Above all the faded-out buttons was a small dark red screen with big, bright orange neon numbers that changed with each passing floor. Each number it changed to made the neon font glitch back and forth, causing his face to scrunch up in a cringe every few seconds. From the parts of the missing tile under the mat, to the start of a rust problem along the handrails, Deku silently swore to himself for taking the elevator. Even the rubbing of the chains above him as they continued upward sounded like laughter at his demise, the squeak taunting him in any future naps. Deku stood silently, hands now stuffed into his pockets as he let his gaze drift along the buttons. Then across the metal reflection in the elevator door. Even though it didn't show who the other person was in tiny detail, he was close enough in the small space that he could tell that the other was taller than him by another head. He was dressed in all black, their face and hair hidden by a plain black hat. Deku swallowed loudly, his mind racing with the idea that time needed to hurry up, and that it had to pry the doors open before he slowly went insane. His mouth became dry and the palpitations that his heart was muttering left his skin to tingle and become sensitive to the inside fuzz of his sweater. His stomach flipped in on itself as Deku couldn't help but let his head turn to his left. His lips parted in a shaky breath as he let his eyes drift to the feet of the person next to him that was, in fact, still staring back at him. First thing that Deku noticed was a pair of expensive black leather boots that reached just above his ankles. Were those Chelsea boots? What college student could afford those? Next were his black jeans that were ripped in slits at both knees. They hung nicely to his thighs, not too tight or too loose. The shirt the man sported was a long-sleeve shirt, the color matching the jeans but the fabric a shiny silk. It was fastened up until the second button, letting the fabric hang open and show the soft skin of the top of his chest. The collar of the shirt was messy, and around the neck of the man hung a simple golden necklace. It rested just between his collar bones and reflected off of the white light in the elevator. Next was the black plain hat that sat on top of the man's head. Blonde spikes peeked beneath all angles of the rim of the hat. Wait. Blonde spikes. Deku let his gaze finally rest on the man's own after the split second of eyeing him head to toe. When his eyes met the others, he froze in place. Almost like a deer caught in headlights. Bakugo Katsuki was standing next to him. Red eyes narrowed and piercing daggers into Deku's shocked green ones, making him wonder if maybe something was on his face. Maybe it was a piece of granola bar from this morning, or maybe his glasses were a little too big on his face. Whatever it was, Bakugo was looking at him like he was on the hunt and that he had just found his next meal. Deku looked away quickly, eyes scanning anything else in the small space besides for the other man. His gaze landed on the buttons in front of him and then on his dirty white sneakers, and then back to the buttons. Bakugo could probably tell that the other was panicking at the way he rocked back and forth on his feet, his mind screaming at the elevator doors to open up already. Or maybe by the way his whole face lit up like a giant red tomato. Being in this close of proximity to the Bakugo Katsuki was setting his mind into AF panic. Especially when he was looking at him like AF snack. He couldn't help but attempt to swallow the lump that was stuck like a rock in his throat, but to no oblige, it stayed put. Deku pressed his lips into a thin line as his fingertips patted the fabric of his jeans to his side. His faint dimples shone through his cheeks as the elevator lurched, causing him to sway in the open space before they both came to a complete halt. They both looked at the door, then at the number that glitched between the number 4 and 5 on the display above the buttons. What the F? You had to be kidding him, right? Before Deku knew what was happening, Bakugo stepped forward, his long, slender fingers finding themselves pressing a button on the wall of the elevator. He was leaned in, but not too close to Deku. He stole a small glance at the taller one, eyes glancing over the blonde's long lashes, the soft skin adoring his face, and the way his eyes narrowed in on the elevator doors when the button didn't work. SHT, the blonde spoke from under his breath. Deku side-eyed him awkwardly. He found no power in himself to face the man or even move a muscle at that as he stared straight ahead, lips still pressed in a thin line as his fingers played with a string of loose fabric on his jeans, headphones still blasting his music. Was this really going to be his first impression? Stuck in an elevator with his crush, in a small space, and not speaking a single word. He had to say something, right? Light up the mood between them as they waited for help. Which, speaking of, how did they ask for help? Deku let his gaze wander along the buttons. Maybe there was a way to intercom for someone to come help put Deku out of his misery. He rocked on his toes while side-eyeing the other man once more, this time the blonde looking down at his phone, fingers typing away as if being stuck in the elevator was an everyday thing to him. Meanwhile, Deku, on the other hand, was about to blow a gasket at being as close to his crush as he was. To the hottest man on campus, the perfect student, and so much more. He was afraid of saying something wrong and giving the man a bad first impression. One wrong word or move and Bakugo could end his reputation on campus in seconds, tell others that Deku was quiet and weird. A creepy second year that he got stuck with in the elevator and that the blonde wishes to never see his face again after. He swallowed loudly, the lump still in his throat as his body tried its best to shake his nerves, almost like he had just stood out in the middle of a snowstorm that felt icy hot to the touch. The blush along his cheeks was still as red as seconds ago, and he cursed himself internally for being such a sore loser when faced with a man. Not just any man, but Bakugo Katsuki. He closed his eyes, lips pressed together before popping them open to take a quick deep breath. When his eyes flung back open and his hands saddled the responsibility of removing the headphones from his ears to hang around his neck, he turned towards the blonde reluctantly, his shoes practically scorching the mat to try to keep him in place from embarrassing himself by talking. So, Deku paused, his mind running way too fast to catch up as Bakugo looked at him from his phone. As soon as their eyes met again, Deku let his words fall empty. It was like he had a script ready in front of him, all memorized and ready to go. Until something came by with steady hands and stole it from him. But there was no script. Just an awkward air of silent space between them as Bakugo lifted his eyebrows. When no words, or even an ounce of a stutter came from Deku's lips, Bakugo threw his palm out, brows furrowed as if the other thought he was crazy. So what? Bakugo asked, voice laced with irritation. Deku gulped. He was lost. He was so lost. Stop muttering and just, Bakugo stopped himself, his gaze falling back to his phone before stuffing it in his pocket. After a moment of silence, the blonde sighed loudly, his fingers coming to pinch the bridge of his nose while pointing at the buttons. Just do you see a call button or something? Deku's posture straightened, body stiff as a board as his eyes basically swallowed the button panel whole. Even though he was staring straight at the faded numbers and symbols, his mind saw them as blurs of white and blue in a mess of a shiny silver platter. He narrowed his gaze, fingertips tapping the denim of his pants as he finally caught the glimpse of his escape route, a button that was the least faded out, probably from the amount of times it's been used over the years. It was of a phone, the light behind it dulled to a deep blue. Deku leaned forward, thumb hovering over it before pressing it. And nothing. Deku pressed it again, his head turning towards the ceiling as if the answer to all of his problems would be right there. Of course they wouldn't. Why would it be that easy? Hold it down, dumbass, Bakugo cut him from his internal silence. Okay, maybe he lied. Maybe it was that easy. Right, Deku spoke, his voice breaking enough to make it sound like a strained whisper. His thumb held the silver button down as he waited for the gray outline around it to light up. Before long, the ring lit up an ocean blue, the light rotating in a wheel before blinking between red and white. A ringtone echoed against the walls, causing both of them to look around as the light changed from red to green. While distracted, Deku's gaze wide and climbing the walls, a woman's voice came from the speaker, the holes in the silver panel just inches below the red screen of the glitching numbers housing the feminine voice. From his left, he could hear the blonde sigh. You've reached the front desk. How may I assist you? The lady spoke, her tone void of any joy or excitement. If Deku wasn't in the predicament that he was in right now, he was sure he'd let out a sarcastic statement, but instead he stood silently without an ounce of a taunting smile. He let his head swivel to his left as Bakugo cleared his throat. Their eyes met, catching Deku's heart in his chest like a cage of butterflies, before he motioned for him to respond to the lady. He turned his attention back to the panel, the thought that he probably looked crazy as he spoke into the button. Yeah, Deku swallowed hard. I think the elevator is stuck. Bakugo spoke up, his voice low and vibrating every inch of Izuku. We're in elevator 3. Stuck between the 4th and 5th floor. The voice from the speaker repeated his words in a whisper to herself. The background sound of fingers typing away at a keyboard was the only thing between the three of them before she spoke loudly, causing Deku to flinch from the volume on the thing. Why wasn't it so loud before? Maybe he was going crazy, or the lady at the front desk moved the phone so close to her mouth that she was practically eating the mic. All right, we'll be right there, she cheered through the phone. Do you know how long it'll be? Bakugo deadpanned. Silence. Sheer and utter silence. They both could hear a pin drop if one was to drop right about now. Dude, Bakugo whispered to himself while running a hand down his face, unaware that the other could hear him, not that he probably cared, either way. Deku sniffled as he shoved his hands back into his pockets. So, what now? He still didn't meet his gaze as he talked to him, but instead, winced at the way his voice strained against the walls of the elevator. He let his fingers curl up into a ball, the fabric of his jeans getting caught in the crosshairs as he thought about Momo. She was probably still sleeping or just waking back up again to get the day started. She was a morning person by default, but with classes starting and the influx of new students ready to annoy the CRP out of their seniors, he didn't blame her for taking another hour or so to mentally prepare herself. At least she wasn't stuck in an elevator with her crush. Almost like how Deku's hopes and dreams of meeting Bakugo in a cool way that would make him want more were just crushed. To have Bakugo come up to Deku and ask his name, for his phone number, and then take him out for a date would have been nice. But this. Deku will forever take the stairs for as long as he is in college. Who was he kidding? It wasn't until when Bakugo turned his back on the green-haired boy that he responded with a pinched expression. Almost like he was annoyed at the other for simply existing in the same space as him. He turned to watch the blonde bend down, knees cracking as he did, and rocked back against the corner of the elevator to sit on the floor mat. Deku cringed inwardly while trying his best not to show it. The floor was dirty. Did the other really expect him to sit down as well? I don't know, the blonde started, eyes narrowed on the elevator doors. But it smells disgusting in here. Oh, Deku furrowed his brows, fingers wrapping around the strap of his bag while huddling in on himself. Did he stink? If he did, he was probably too nervous to pay attention. I can't smell anything. He could hear the buzzing sound of the BLD rushing in his ears as Bakugo turned his head in his direction, stared straight ahead and burning holes into green. If it wasn't for his curls, he was positive that the man would have laughed at how fast the tips of his ears turned a deep apple blush. Deku looked down, unable to meet the other's gaze as he dug his sneaker into the floor mat to keep himself occupied. Why don't you sit down? His crush's voice was sharp, almost like a taunt, like he knew that Deku was coming undone silently in the elevator. The floor's dirty, he swallowed. You a clean freak or something? Bakugo inquired. What? No. Deku looked up through his lashes, gaze still ignoring Bakugo's while he tried his best to compose his next sentence. You just don't know what people track in. I'm not sitting on this floor. It can't be worse than BLD or PSS, he retaliated, his accent thick against the walls. Right. His accent was more thick in person, but deep and nice to the ears. Actually, now that Deku stood awkwardly far away in the other space, he noticed the smallest hint of a German accent peeking through. If you were looking for it, you could tell, but if you weren't, then it could easily be overlooked. But Deku noted it. That's absolutely disgusting. Bakugo whispered something under his breath as he looked away, head resting against the metal panel below the handrail. He took his silence as an opportunity to turn back towards the elevator doors, hand tracing the scratches of the surface, the feeling of the cold steel under his fingertips setting a blaze of goosebumps down his arms and raising the hair on the back of his neck. He let his fingers feel the crack of the door before a voice behind him stopped him. Don't try to open it, Bakugo warned. I wasn't planning on it. Deku continued to feel for anything to save him, something for a distraction besides for the rapid beating of his chest. Do I look like I could open the door if I wanted to? I've met people smaller than you that could do bigger things, so yes. Probably. Deku snorted at his comment before feeling his phone vibrate against his thigh and through his jeans. He reached his hand into his pocket and dug through it before pulling out his phone, a text message lighting up the screen. The notification sat under the time that read 10:23 in big bold numbers. As he read the message, his eyes narrowed and fingers gripping the case, another text came through, making his phone vibrate against the palm of his hand. Momo, hey, did you get us both a seat? Momo, also, is class busy? Deku's eyes opened wide. SHT. He was supposed to save them both a seat. He looked over at Bakugo, who then returned his gaze with a lifted eyebrow. Deku quickly looked away with a deep swallow, his thumbs racing against the keyboard on his phone as he sent Momo a quick text. To his left, he could hear Bakugo sigh under his breath. Deku, sorry, stuck in the lift with Bakugo. Not even seconds later came a text, each letter in capitals. Momo, what? Momo, what elevator? OMG Deku, in the elevators after the service desks, we already called down, just waiting for help. Momo, dude Momo, how are you not freaking out? Deku, I am freaking out. Deku, also Bakugo is so hot up close. Deku, his voice in person is so nice too. Another text came through, but before Deku could have the chance to read it, a deep voice came from his left, making him twiddle with his thumbs over his device while slowly looking over at the blonde with all the courage he could muster up. With the way your phone is going off, you must be popular, huh? His voice was laced with sarcasm, his gaze on the metal doors. No, Deku felt his cheeks grow hot while waving his phone around. Just a friend. Bakugo hummed, his eyebrow quirked while looking away. He let his tongue poke the inside of his cheek before speaking. What's the name? Name. Jesus F your name. What is your name? Oh, it's, Izuku. Izuku Midoriya. Or Deku. Either one works for me, he responded while praying to the heavens that Bakugo would stop talking to him because oh God, he was losing it. He was going to become a stuttering mess in a second. He could feel it just on the tip of his tongue. He was going to mess up a word. Then sit there and think about how he messed up talking in front of the man that half the people on campus have a crush on, including Deku. Bakugo hummed again, his lip caught between his teeth. Mine's Bakugo. I know who you are, Deku said too quickly to think. Before he even realized it, Bakugo was even quicker to respond. Yeah. Deku shook his head, the curious but teasing tone of the other replaying in his head and causing a red tint to brush against his cheeks. Deku was not going to get turned on in the F elevator. He was a loser, but not that much of a loser. How? You're not one of my stalkers, are you? I didn't take you to be one of those weird F airs if you are. I'm not, Deku slightly lied. He wasn't a stalker, but it wasn't like he didn't have a crush on the boy for the past year and slurped up any information he could when offered. I just know you from my roommate, Shoto. He also plays. So no, I am not one of your stalkers. Even though Bakugo wore a hat that covered his eyes, and from the angle that Izuku stood, he could see the blonde rack his stare up and down Deku as if he was looking for something that yelled liar. Or something that would clearly give him away. He didn't blame him, however. If he was popular amongst the students on campus, was hot, and had as many opportunities that the blonde had, he'd be careful of everyone he met, too. It felt like ages of an awkward silence as minutes ticked by before they spoke again, causing Deku to pause at the fact that the blonde still wanted to speak with him. Or did he? He was probably trying to make small talk with the second year, but every word that came from Deku's mouth felt like 5 years were shaved off his lifespan at the way his heart was beating from his chest. What year? Bakugo tilted his head. Second year. You. Deku asked even if he already knew. Third year, Bakugo said as he let his fingers brush against the rim of his hat before removing it. Do any sports or something? You know, this is starting to feel like an interrogation, Deku joked, his voice laced with a hint of sarcasm as a bead of sweat rolled from his brow. You sure you aren't my stalker? As if. I'm just making small talk, Bakugo snapped while running his fingers through his hair. Deku looked him over quietly, the crackle of the intercom ahead fading into the space like smoke as he stuffed his hands into his pockets. No sports. Yet. Maybe go back to running track or something. I live in a dorm with 3 other people that do a sport, so I guess that I'll eventually end up somewhere. There was silence from the other boy as he looked over, his head pointed towards the ceiling of the elevator tiles as the crackle continued, and then a soft voice of a woman filling the emptiness of the small room. Deku let out a long breath as she spoke, his fingers crossed in his pockets at the thought of incoming freedom. Can you guys hear me from in there? The lady asked, her voice muffled from the sounds of ruffling from the other side of the doors. Deku pressed his thumb against the phone button while listening to Bakugo scurry up onto his feet. Even though he was faced away from the other, he could feel the presence of the boy from behind him. He waited for the button to glow bright before finally speaking into the button for a second time. "Yes, ma'am. We can hear you," Deku swallowed, fingers still crossed in his pocket. A couple of voices came from outside the elevator, causing them both to turn towards the crack of the doors and then back to the metal panel of glowing buttons. "Awesome. We got some help on the other side of the door. Just go ahead and listen to their instructions and we should have you guys out within 5 minutes, okay?" "Yes, ma'am." Luckily, within seconds, both of them turned towards the door to the elevator as a booming voice came from the other side. Deku's heart leaped as he smiled to himself, his fist curled up in his pocket as he whispered sweet thoughts to himself. Help was here. Help was finally here. But what Deku didn't know, was that as soon as the doors were pried open minutes later in utter silence that lay in an awkward fog between the two boys, that a crowd of students would be waiting outside the doors in the small hallway, some going back and forth as the busiest hour was passing by. Better yet, Deku couldn't avoid the gazes of his 3 roommates as he slid through the elevator doors and into the hallway, a blush dressing his face as Uraraka smacked his shoulder before high-fiving Momo in a celebration of whatever the F. Deku scurried away after bowing and thanking the firefighters relentlessly and completely ignoring Bakugo in an attempt to flee the scene, the other 3 following him closely while rapidly firing questions at him as he neared the stairs. He sighed loudly. Enough elevators, enough of that stupid blonde mess of hair that sent his blood pressure through the roof, and enough of Uraraka's blaring voice asking him how hot Bakugo was up close while students side-eyed them in passing as Deku marched up each step like his life depended on it. Being stuck in the elevator with Katsuki Bakugo was already enough. Not that it was a bad thing, but Deku always dreamed of maybe meeting somewhere cute, like on a carnival ride or something. Not within the confines of an elevator that Deku couldn't escape from. So what a great start to the year, right? Or maybe the best part was that the blonde followed behind them, not too close enough to hear the brunette's rapid firing, but enough to the point that he was practically stepping on the back of Shoto's shoes, who always took the last spot when it came to the roommates entering a line formation. It caused Todoroki to turn around, a zipped smile on his face as he spoke the blonde's name loud enough for the rest of them to hear, including Uraraka as a cue to shut her mouth and not ask any more questions. Deku listened into their conversation as best as he could despite the talking from passing students, the blasting of music in the passing hour, and the squeaking of everyone's shoes. Now that Deku was thinking about it, it was his first time seeing the two interact in public. Their conversation output and voices were low when speaking to one another, almost like they were two people that could care less to be in the other's presence but were forced to. When they did talk, Deku could fish out a few words in their conversation, which included Bakugo's first morning class. Production design. Deku cussed to himself. Looks like he'd have to spend another 2 hours with Katsuki Bakugo, but this time, he wasn't confined in a small room, so he was okay with it. Chapter 3, Decision. You don't need to run, people. We are not in high school anymore. Deku quickly emerged from the hot and crowded hallway, his professor loudly scolding some 4th years in the back of the class as they booked it up the stairs, their limbs flailing in a race and hitting others on the way up. Momo was hot on his tail in an effort to escape the lingering body odor, pushy 1st and 4th years, and the occasional yelling in the hall as friends reunited from over the summer break. As soon as the both of them walked into the lecture hall for production design, they let out a shared sigh. Somewhere on the path to class, Uraraka and Shoto broke off from the rest on the 5th floor to visit the new study hall added to the building during the summer months. Bakugo, on the other hand, had disappeared into a small crowd that beckoned him over right before class, some faces familiar to Deku. He's never met them, but he's seen their faces too many times to count during the football season. Always rowdy and loud, but respectful despite the massive egos the members wore on their sleeves. The lecture hall was large, the ceiling open and wide enough to allow any natural lighting to shine down on the incoming wave of students. Some of them were running for the best seats, others walking with their phone directly in their face with no care in the world of where they were going or who they were walking into. They always took the closest seat they could find, considering that the seats weren't assigned and they weren't about to make an effort in where to sit every morning. Deku couldn't blame them. Because when he did make an effort, he got stuck in the stupid elevator. Just his luck, too. The hall had expanded in length as if 4 high school classrooms were thrown into one, the space large enough to fit a whole cafeteria if you wanted to. Capel was a well-populated university, so it made sense that the halls were large, too. There were multiple rows of stairs leading up and down each aisle, and every time someone ran up them, they'd catch their foot on the edge, tripping upwards and face-planting in a tiny tumble. Almost every time. Deku learned from his fair share of embarrassing moments last year, his cheeks always red and mouth stuttering random words to the nearest person whenever it happened. The stairs were a muted, coarse blue carpet that clashed with the stained wooden flooring that adorned the front of the lecture hall. The walls that were once white had turned into a creamy color from over more than 100 years of standing, the bottom half replaced with panels of light washed wood that were dyed from the sun peeking through the glass roof. The whole room felt sun-stained, to Izuku. The seating was tiered, with at least 20 or so more of rows to house all the old and new students coming in. As Deku watched them pile in, some in groups or some walking in completely alone while also noticing some familiar faces from last year, he realized how full the class was compared to his first year inside the same lecture hall. Maybe it was because the course was mixed, hence the mixing pot of different years that poured in through the doors, or maybe people just really liked film all of a sudden. They were easy classes after all, with the majority of the work just watching movies and talking about them in groups. Easy A's. The front of the lecture hall was littered with chalkboards on both sides of a large projector screen that took up a good chunk of the middle wall. The teacher's desk was angled towards the students in the corner, and right next to it stood a large red oakwood podium that glistened in the lighting from years of polishing. A microphone poked from the surface of the podium that the teacher stood at, mouth almost eating the mic as he spoke to the class. "Please, again, no running," he said, tired eyes following someone in the back that was racing for a seat, his tone low and unamused. "You, in the back. Are we still children?" Deku scanned the rows of seats, eyes squinted before realizing that the first few rows were almost void of students. He turned to Momo, thumbs gripping the strap of his backpack across his chest while he rocked on his heels. "Second row. Third?" Deku questioned, eyes wide with anticipation. "Oh, wow. Maybe the second row." Momo gave him no time to answer as she grabbed his wrist, leading them both up the aisle and into the second row to claim their spots. "I can tell that the classes have more upper years," Deku whispered, even though no one could hear him from the rowdy fourth years in the back of the class playing ball with God knows what. "Yeah," Momo huffed with laughter as they squeezed past a student. "We actually don't have to fight for the front seats this year." "Thank goodness," Deku laughed with her, a tuft of blonde hair from the corner of his eye catching his attention as they pushed their folding chairs down. Deku watched as the man claimed his place in the front row quietly, his bag that he never noticed in the elevator slinging over his shoulder and onto the ground. Man, was he really that down bad that all he focused on was the blonde? It was like when he was around him, his surroundings didn't matter. "Can't believe we have a class with Katsuki Bakugo," Momo spoke quietly under her breath for her friend to hear. "I can't believe he's sitting in the front row." Momo cleared her throat as they both sat down and removed their computers from their bags. Deku glanced at him once more before turning away and eavesdropping into the fourth year's conversation in the back row as more students rolled in. "Well, maybe he likes having an education and paying attention in class, and not talking tea about who's screwing who behind the bleachers," Momo said, her eyes motioning to the loud students in the back row that were currently being stared down by the teacher. "Maybe. That would be different. A third year caring about education and not drags, SEC, and parties," Deku said, his tone dripping with sarcasm as he turned on his computer. "If that's a thing, I'm surprised it's Bakugo." Momo side-eyed him. "You really think the quarterback wouldn't care about his grades? He probably has a reputation to uphold and all that. Plus, I know with cheerleading, I have to keep most of my grades above an A or I'm cut." Same must go for other sports, I'm sure. Maybe. Deku typed in his password as he eyed his teacher who was currently still talking into the mic on the podium, once again warning students to settle down before eyeing a mess of long blonde hair from the first row to his left. He leaned into Momo, voice low. Hey, isn't that Anna? Anna Servino or whatever. Momo followed his gaze. Yeah, it is. She was in tryouts to be a flyer this year. Why? Deku side-eyed the students in the back as they continued to talk, their voices low but still loud enough as they echoed against the empty walls. A few film posters were scattered here and there that adorned the faces of past alumni. One of Ed's shot his actor name plastered proudly behind their teacher's desk like a trophy. Isn't that who they're talking about? He asked, eyes motioning to the fourth years. They're really gonna talk about her when she's in the same room. I mean, why do they care who she screws behind the bleachers, anyways? It's not like it's unheard of. Everyone does it. They only care because the man she was messing with was from a rival school. On rival grounds, Momo sighed as she looked at the girl. But it's stupid, nonetheless. Someone should tell them to stop. Almost as if on cue, Bakugo turned around, the end of his pencil between his teeth as he looked up at the fourth years in the back. Eyes narrowed and jaw clenched, he stayed still and silent, glare shooting daggers as Deku listened to them quiet down rows above him. When they came to a halt in their rowdy endeavors, Bakugo turned back around, head down as he opened up his computer and continued on like nothing happened. Almost like it was an everyday thing for him. The rest of the students piled into the lecture hall within minutes, the row in front of Deku filling up quickly with mostly second years, and the rows behind him crowding with third and fourth years, even a few advanced first years mingling with their seniors in a mix of whispers and laughter. He hated it so much that it made him want to tear his hair straight out in a fit of rage and frustration. Another second year walked into the row behind him, bag slung over his shoulder and walking with long strides as he neared behind Izuku, bag slapping the back of his head without stopping to apologize. Deku winced, looking behind him and at the second year as he brought a hand to the back of his head. The second year was one that he's never seen around campus but heard through the grapevine. Nito Monoma, a college celebrity based on being infamous around campus. He played as a cornerback on the football team, made a lot of enemies, and has an attitude as big as the size of the sun. Deku turned back to face the front of the hall while looking at Momo, his mouth open as he eyed a banner with their mascot plastered all over it that sat above the double doors to the classroom. Momo leaned in better to hear him over the popping of soda can tabs, the rustling of paper, and the rapid clicking of computer keys. We sure have a lot of campus celebs in this class, he said while sinking into his seat. I hate it. Momo looked around, an eyebrow quirked while chewing on her lip. I only see one. Monoma. Down at the end behind us. Oh, Momo didn't look, but instead pretended to be busy on her computer to fight the urge not to turn around. I don't necessarily think I'd consider him as a celebrity. More like a teenage dirtbag, if anything. Many people say the same thing about Bakugo, but he was nice to me in the elevator. Deku lied somewhat. I've heard different, she said, nail between her teeth as they watched a ball of paper fly across the lecture hall. But I guess that if I had 5 different names that people referred to me as, my ego would be so high that I'd be a PP, too. But he's not mean, I swear, Deku defended. Awards and names mean nothing. She put her chin onto the palm of her hand and looked up at the ceiling, her voice soft as she hummed to herself. What is it that he won last year? Star athlete. Star student. He's currently on the president's list, you know. Isn't he what people call the IT boy, also? Capel's beauty. Or how about all the sports fans that refer to him as the Golden Bear? Would that not get to your head? Deku sunk into his chair even more with a scoff. She looked at him, lips pressed in a thin line but said nothing more in retaliation as their teacher's booming voice bounced off the walls, everyone dropping down into a quiet sea of wide eyes, their attention forward and focused on the man at the podium. As you guys all know, this course is production design, which is going to go over many things that involve how to go about storytelling in a visual way, his teacher continued, hands waving in the air as he talked. I'll be your teacher for this course, so for starters I'll introduce myself, and then maybe we can go ahead and start with some icebreakers for my students, shall we? Izuku silently cursed under his breath. Of course. Since when did icebreakers in college still exist? My name is Kigo Takami, or some people in the industry may know me as Hawks. I've been a teacher for Capella University for about 3 years now, going into my 4th this year. I actually went to college to study teaching at Capella, and sat in this same lecture about 6 years ago. Hawks pointed at the floor as he began pacing back and forth at the front of the hall. I also do small roles in movies on the side, including traveling the world and helping backstage with Broadway programs that some of you may have a chance to work with this year, as well. Hawks kept rambling on, his eyes scanning the rows of students as Deku let the heel of his palm dig into his cheek in boredom. The clock on the wall was more interesting than his teacher's life story, one that he had the chance to hear about once last year. He went into his studies, his life, his 2 cats named Ghibli and Nutcracker, and continued on with the occasional ramble of something completely off topic, like how his best friend was a famous actor, or a joke thrown in here and there that got some students to laugh. Deku listened to him talk before sighing into his palm. His leg bounced under the table, nerves on edge as the hair on his arm stuck up like someone had just rubbed a balloon up and down his bare skin. He let his chin fall deeper into his hand, head now at a tilt as he drummed his fingertips along the keys of his computer. He bit his lip as he thought about the icebreakers, even debated on getting up and going to the bathroom to avoid it like the plague. But that would just bring attention to him. People would look at him and judge him, and he didn't want that. But he also didn't want to stand up in a sea of people and give them a life story of, so, who's ready for the icebreakers? Hawks said with a smile on his face and hands bundled together. Deku looked around at all the raised hands. Even Momo was raising her hand, a pencil between her teeth as she stared straight ahead. Awesome, so we have a lot of excited souls in here, Hawks laughed as he paced the front of the room, his shoes squeaking as he pointed to a man sitting in the first seat nearest the door. We'll start here. Give us your name, maybe let us know what year you're in, any sports or hobbies, and what your major is. What brings you here to this class? Hawks motioned for the man to take the speaking role as he leaned against the podium, hand finding a place in his pocket as he quieted down the class to listen. Everyone's eyes were on the man as he stood up, hands grabbing the bottom of his shirt and pulling it down while turning towards the back rows. His cheeks were red like he'd been out in the cold for hours, and as he spoke, his voice quivered with nerves in front of everyone while he wiped his palms onto the fabric of his jeans. When he opened his mouth, he stared at the empty aisle that divided the students to avoid anyone else's gaze. There were whispers in the back, including laughter, but Deku ignored them. My name's Yuta, I'm a first year, he looked towards Hawks who motioned him to continue. I don't play any sports and my major is, film and TV. Once he was done talking, he quickly sat down like a weight was thrown into his lap, and the rope was tied to the next person. They stood up, nervous as ever, hands rubbing together as they went down the line. First year, another second year, a first year, second year, and then next was the person Deku straightened up for, eyes digging holes into the back of blonde hair as Bakugo stood from his seat. Everyone before him showed every sign of a nervous breakdown, their eyes not meeting others and posture closed in on itself. But Bakugo stood straight up, hands in his pockets as he turned towards the class like he was the teacher. It looked like an everyday thing, and he was probably used to the attention. Bakugo played in stadiums that housed thousands of people, all their attention on him through hours of gameplay. They watched him tackle others or get tackled, watched every good or bad move on the field. His whole life was judged out there, so as he stood here in the classroom with everyone, it felt like cake, like nothing else could get judged that was already laid out on that field year after year. I'm Katsuki Bakugo, I'm a third year, he spoke like he was tired. Like he was bored, even. I play football and as a hobby I do community service with the fraternities. I have 2 majors, one being film and TV, and my other being in sports management. Deku perked up. New information. Awesome job, Katsuki. Hawks bellowed as he urged for the next student to take Bakugo's place. Bakugo sat down as the next stood up. Then the next, and the next, and the next. Anna came next, and as she spoke, the students in the back whispered between themselves, making Hawk speak up to quiet their efforts of embarrassing her, and to remind them that it was, in fact, not high school anymore. After what felt like 5 minutes, they finally made it to the second row, Deku's row. He looked to his left and passed Momo. There was still at least over 20 people in this row to get through before it came to Deku's turn. Great. He liked his lips as he looked back at his computer. He still had time to get up and go to the bathroom. He'd go when it got down to 5 people before Momo. He'd be quick and leave his stuff here, make it seem like he was to return and not completely dip from his responsibilities in class. Or maybe he could take his stuff, considering that the whole 2 hours of class would be just icebreakers and no work. Right, he'd skip out on class. Just for today. He quickly shut his computer without turning it off and turned back towards the student who was taking the stage. They were quickly moving down the row like rapid fire. Deku needed them to slow down just enough to get his SHT together and hightail it out of there. He let his head fall to his right to look for his backpack, but as he did so, green eyes locked with red from across the first row. Bakugo was looking at him from under his hat. Straight F at him. His cheeks flashed a bright pink and spread across his face like someone had just slapped him 20 times. Deku swallowed hard, eyes ripping from their shared glance as he looked back towards his left, then back to his right and at Bakugo, who finally turned away, his eyes on the standing classmate just feet away from Izuku. How was he supposed to talk like this? He was a mess with just a shared glance with the blonde, and his cheeks were as red as Momo's lipstick. Which, speaking of Momo, she was standing up, hands flattening out her skirt while smiling. She was a natural at talking, especially in crowds, and her fingers found their place interlocked behind her. Was Deku losing track of time? Did another 5 minutes fly by without him noticing? He was going crazy. He was losing it, but he couldn't leave. Not when he was next. My name is Momo Yaoyorozu. I'm a student in my 2nd year and I'm the captain of the cheerleading team. I have many hobbies and I also have 2 majors. One being film and TV, and the other being a voice major. She smiled, tucked in her shirt, and sat down with an elegance that Deku could never replicate even if he tried. Thank you, Momo. Can't wait to start this year off with you again, Hawk stated before looking at Deku, startling him. Next up. Deku awkwardly laughed as he stood up, hands using the armrests of the chair for leverage as he felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on him. Not that he cared before, but knowing that Bakugo was one of those pairs of eyes made him want to roll into a ball and disappear under his seat. The name's Izuku Midoriya, he swallowed as he felt red eyes burn into him. Luckily, years of public speaking being under his belt caught him like a fly to a light. He just couldn't think about who was a row away. I'm a 2nd year, I do know sports, and I have 2 majors as well, which are film and TV, and theater. Sweet. I'm glad to have you back, Izuku. Can't wait to see the silly things you'll bring this year. Hawks laughed. But Izuku didn't. His eyes were so pretty. MHM, Momo hummed as she bit her lip, gaze on the half cup of hot chocolate sitting in front of her, her red lipstick tainting the edge of the porcelain. Shoto sat next to her, his body curved in onto itself as he sunk deeper into his seat with every word that Deku sputtered. He had yet to touch his full cup of water while Shoto was on his second. His eyes were this deep, deep amber. But in the elevator light they looked so red. Like an apple, Deku sighed blissfully with a smile, chin on his palm as he looked past the 2 sitting in front of him. Seeing him up close was like a dream come true. Right, Momo forced a smile. He's also really tall. A head over me, I cowled, Deku. Ha. Shoto sat up in his chair and leaned forward, hands gripping the edge of the table as Deku's eyes widening with curiosity. He was oblivious, excited but oblivious to the fact that the past 15 minutes of sitting down, he sprouted a mouthful of words. He word vomited, rightfully so. Because this was Bakugo he was talking about. His crush that he finally got to meet in person and up close, and not from the sidelines, across the campus, or in passing while walking to classes. Bakugo finally knew of his existence. Not in the way Deku wanted. But he knew. Enough about him, what about you? Shoto pointed at him from across the table, voice tangled in irritation as he furrowed his eyebrows. Didn't you audition for a play? Let's hear about that, did you get the role? Oh. I won't know until sometime this week, Deku said as he shrunk into his seat from embarrassment. I tried to audition for the main role. Momo's eyes widened. The main role. I thought you said that was above your pay grade last year. It was. Deku looked down at his hands as he fiddled with his fingers. But Miss Usajiyama told me to do it. Young Midoriya. Deku whipped his head to the sound of his name, his eyes tracking every inch of the packed cafe before meeting eyes with a tall blonde man, his face sunken in but sky-blue stare confident and inviting. He marched towards their table with a large smile and unbalanced stride, and as he walked, students watched him with mouths stuffed with food and quiet whispers. He limped towards them, both of his hands shot out in front of him as if to reach out to the shocked trio. It was a rare occurrence to see the man anywhere else but on the field, gym, or anywhere that training took place. Deku was used to seeing him during games, or when he would visit Shoto during practice in the way back of the bleachers where he'd go unnoticed. But having him address the younger boy publicly was something else. Deku's eyes widened as he neared the table, large grin still plastered on his face as he smoothed down the wrinkles in his suit that looked a tad bit too big on him. He cleared his throat and fixed his tie before eyeing the two across from the Deku, and then back to the boy, and then back to the duo. May I speak to young Midoriya? He smiled while throwing his hands behind him. Alone. Deku opened his mouth to speak but grew quiet as Shoto shot him a glance that read, "Shut up." He gripped the edge of the counter, palms sweaty as a barista from the other side of the cafe yelled out a random name as a man approached them. Shoto and Momo slithered out their booth as no words were spoken between the trio. Just dead silence as green eyes pleaded avoiding ones to stay. So, the blonde slid into the booth as the other two claimed an awkward distance away in the corner, their bodies facing away but still in earshot of their conversation. Izuku Midoriya, it's a pleasure to meet you here. Todoroki has said many great things about you, you know. Deku swallowed hard as he listened to the tapping of coins falling into a tip jar from in the distance, the faint music in the background, and the thud of a wet mop against the tiles as a worker scrubbed away at the stained grout. The sight of a couple skiing face at one of the back tables brought him back to reality, his eyelids fluttering as he turned towards the man across from him. Yagi Toshinori. One of the world's best quarterbacks back when he played. He was a star in the eyes of all football fans, both old and young. He was legendary in the eyes of Deku, he was like his hero. He always looked up to him, wanted to be him. Yagi Toshinori played football since he was a young child and all the way until his 30s, that was until he was badly injured and told he could never play again. He would walk around with a limp, sometimes his eyes glossy from the memory of the tackle that ended his career and landed him here, in Capella University as one of the headlining coaches. Even though he couldn't play, his legacy was still ongoing and alive, especially when he looked at Bakugo Katsuki. The quarterback was like his child, his only pride and joy that he pushed forward to fulfill his legacy that was so short-lived for Yagi. Deku looked down at his hands that cupped his drink as he shook his head nervously at what Yagi had said to him. He avoided all eye contact until the other cleared his throat, making Green look up as a group of girls walked by their table, their perfume attacking all of Deku's senses. Deku swallowed hard. He knew what this was about. Knew that Shoto set him up for this. He wasn't ready to make this decision, not now when both his friends were waiting in earshot, fingers crossed that he would hop into the bandwagon and take the opportunity that was being handed to him. One that many wanted and trained for. He didn't deserve this. Didn't work for it. So how was this fair? Yagi leaned forward, his hands coming before him to interlock on the table. I heard from him that you were interested in playing a sport this year. Is that true? As Deku spoke, a worker swung by without talking, her chartreuse hair swinging behind her as she placed a warm cup of coffee in front of the older man. As he watched her walk away, he realized that she was one of Momo's friends from the cheer team. Her name was Toru. He couldn't remember at a time like this, not when he was getting stared down at by Toshinori, and his friends from the corner that kept slipping him constipated stares. Deku shook his head as if to convince himself that having this talk in the middle of a student-packed cafe wasn't crazy. Was he about to get drafted? So late into the season. I see. Yagi let his fingers snake around the coffee mug and bring it to his lips. It felt like forever by the time he set it back down. Have you ever had any interest in playing football? Wouldn't necessarily be a career purse, but it would look good on your resume if you'd like to expand further after college. Deku swallowed the ball in his throat. I've not decided, really. I understand. Football isn't a small sport. Takes a lot of dedication and practice. Deku shook his head as if he agreed but spoke nothing. Instead, he straightened his posture, locked gazes with the man across from him, and let his hands fall flat on the table. The blonde perked up, eyes shining as his usual smile returned to his face. I'd like to, but I don't think I could do it. I don't think I have the dedication, Deku squeezed out, his eyes straining as he held his breath after he stopped speaking. Yagi frowned as he scratched at his cheek, his face blank besides for the worry oozing from between his furrowed brows. Oh. Toshinori sighed deeply as he looked towards his cup and then back up at Izuku. Young Midoriya, I always see you during practice in the bleachers always by yourself. Your admiration meets no ends and I adore you for that. But that look in your eyes as you watch my boys practice is very hard to find. Deku was quiet as he leaned forward on the table, eyes wide as he watched the older man take another sip of his coffee. Yagi took a deep breath as he itched the back of his neck with uncertainty as if he should continue. But with the way green bore into blue, he opened his mouth once more. I wouldn't be here if that look in your eyes weren't the same as mine when I was younger. You have great talent, and your spirit reminds me greatly of young Bakugo's, very bright and full of life. He smiled at Deku before slowly removing himself from his side of the booth. But if you don't think you have the dedication, or something else that's keeping you occupied, then maybe I was wrong about coming here. The older man stood from his seat, both his hands pulling his jacket down to flatten the creases in the fabric. Deku watched as he spun around and reached into his wallet before digging around in it. As he pulled cash from his wallet and gently placed it on the table, he gave him one last smile. Your drinks are on me, and with that, Yagi turned around with a limp as he dismissed himself from Izuku's presence. Izuku sat silently to himself as he looked down at the coins and bills strewn across the table, and then to his two roommates that looked between Deku and Yagi as he made his way across the cafe. Shoto turned to him, brows furrowed before bringing his hands to his face and rubbing them down his cheeks in a sigh. He slouched forward while Momo brought her hands in a ball to her chest as she watched Yagi reach the glass doors, his hand gripping the metal bar and pushing the exit open. But Deku was too focused on Shoto to see his idol leaving. Right. His idol. The one he probably just let down because he was too scared to reach out his comfort zone. By the way Shoto stood still, his head lowered and eyes closed, Deku could tell that his best friend who probably worked his butt off to get Yagi to even glance in Deku's direction was reeking of disappointment. He didn't even spare a glance as he returned to the table and dropped into the booth, Momo following suit as she gave both boys a reassuring smile. For once in his life, he was tired of disappointing people. Deku closed his eyes, furrowed his brows in regret, and took in a long, deep breath before opening them once more. His hand slapped against the surface as he pushed on the table to help him sit up. Momo gasped loudly and clung onto Shoto as the table was shifted their way, the sound ear-piercing as it dragged along the sticky floor caked with residue. Within seconds, Deku apologized profusely before booking it from their booth and through the groups of students in the cafe, some snapping at him as he shoulder-checked them by accident. His shoes squeaked loudly against the newly cleaned floors as he ran, heart pounding in his chest at what he was about to do. "Wait!" Deku called out as he neared the glass doors and threw them open. "Wait! Toshinori!" The door flung open, the hinges squeaking loudly as students scurried along at the sight of Deku tumbling out the door, his hair a mess and fingers gripping the fabric of his shirt when he came face to face with Yagi once more. He narrowed his eyes on him, his vision blurry with threatening tears. God, Deku was such a wreck. He was chained with too many emotions. But when he looked at Yagi through the hazy lens of his tears, all his mind could muster up was the silhouette of Katsuki Bakugo. He was talking to Katsuki Bakugo as he spoke, tears streaming down his face as he reached for the man who graciously offered his hands to support Deku. Which was ironic in some sense, considering the other couldn't hold himself up well on some days. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to disappoint you," Deku said in a bow as he sniffled loudly, students passing in an awkward silence. "I do believe in myself. And I'll meet your expectations. I'll drop everything to join the team." "Whoa now, young Midoriya," Yagi spoke, but Deku heard Bakugo's voice talking to him. "You can still play and do what your heart desires. But can I still join?" Deku wiped his snot on his sleeve. "It's so late into the season and everything." "Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about," Yagi scratched at the back of his neck as he grimaced. "Usually we don't accept late fish. Actually, we never accept late fish since we go through many stages of picking and practice before the semester begins. Plus, Bakugo and I go through the portfolios of those that attended tryouts, so I never accept anyone outside of his choices." But Yagi let the word drag out as he placed a hand on Deku's shoulder and steadied him as he stood up, a smile beaming from both ears. "I trust Todoroki, so when he recommended that I talk to you, I wanted to give it a shot." Deku bowed again in response, his eyes still teary as he stood straight up. "And I know college football can be hard, but it comes with its perks when you're at Capella University," Yagi said as he stepped aside, his head motioning to the other to follow him on his walk. "Come, walk with me so we can talk." Deku shook his head as he followed the man. When he spoke, he had to look up, his attention focused solely on the coach as they made their way across the small walkway in front of the guest services center, the workers all laughing with one another in the window to the building. Deku watched them while he sniffled, rubbing his nose on his shirt once more as they neared a tree lean at the edge of the walkway and passed the guest services. Some students were sitting peacefully along and under the trees, some studying and others eating their lunches as they watched across the small lake that lay past the tree lean. Across was a large parking garage that was attached to the student dorms. It was a place that Deku went to often. Being here settled his nerves just a tad bit, but he was still shaking slightly as he pulled his sleeves over his hands in an effort to keep warm. "If you were serious about joining, Capella will offer athletic scholarships to almost all athletes since they represent the university. It's called the Champion Sports Scholarship. Takes about 10,000 off your tuition for the full 4 years. So that's a big plus," Yagi said as Deku watched him talk, his hands animated as ever. "And when I had Ms. Takayama look into your scholarships, I saw that you were already here on the Yoichi Memorial Scholarship for Arts. Which is awesome. We love to have genius athletes represent our team." Yagi continued to talk until they reached the edge of the small lake, the wind in their hair as they traced the outline of the body of water. He talked, and Deku let him as his dried tears stuck to his face like glue. But with this all being said, Toshinori stopped, his fingers intertwining behind his back as he turned towards Izuku. "You'd most likely never step foot on the field." Deku's face fell. "Ha! The position we are trying to fill is a backup for the running back, or the halfback, if I should say, since the backup transferred 2 weeks ago. However, I do consider you the best option," he smiled. Even though his heart was shattered into a bunch of pieces knowing he'd never step foot on the field, he still returned a pained smile to the blonde. Maybe it was for the best that he didn't feel the turf beneath his cheek, or the tackle from men twice his size. He'd be on the sidelines, but his mom would be proud. Shoto would be proud, too. So would Momo, Uraraka, his dad. So, do you accept the position? Yagi broke the younger boy from his thoughts while he cleared his throat. Here goes nothing. I do. Deku held his breath as Yagi spoke, his mind racing with the idea that this was the best thing to happen to him. But deep down, his heart screamed at him that this was, in fact, the worst decision he's ever made in his 20 years of living. Yagi clapped his hands and laughed, the cheerful sound repeating in the echo chamber of the bright, blue empty sky. Awesome, young Midoriya. Now let's get you enrolled into strength training and I will let the team know to expect you and your brilliant attitude. Ah, SHT.